Jeffrey Glick from Foursquare. A question for Professor Endy and one for Lori. Is it possible that you could engineer a gene drive, Professor, that you could insert into a nation's food supply that would render the entire food supply vulnerable to a trigger chemical or the like as a bioweapon, or engineer an insect to bite humans and insert a gene drive into humans? Are these conceivable bioweapons with the new gene drive technology? And for Lori, the U.S. is signatory to the NMOD, Environmental Modifications Treaty, banning environmental modifications. Should that global entity be convened as a forum for some of these global regulations?
So the first question was to Drew, I think.
Very quickly.
Gene drive in the food supply.
Yeah, very quickly, we don't know, but it's conceivable. The patent filings coming out of Harvard suggest that that could be practiced, but nobody's practiced it. I'd refer you to Kevin Esvelt and others for thoughtful technical responses. The one thing I would point out regarding gene drives is I have not seen any experimental evidence of a gene drive being 100% successful in terms of penetrating a population, even in the most carefully controlled laboratory experiments with relatively homogeneous strains of yeast. You can get to the high 90s, but I've never seen anything to total completion. Now, I might not have the latest data, but I think that's relevant from a policy perspective. Could you still nevertheless realize disturbances of some significance? Yes. And then just as a placeholder, your second question, implies in a way being responsive to some of the comments coming from the ETC group and others in terms of how one might want to consider the regulation of gene drives.
Lori?
So I can point you to that offline if you like.
Lori?
Yeah, I think I kind of prefer to take it jumping off the previous question, because it doesn't matter which international entity you imagine activating to address which specific problem. We have a first problem in front of that, which Drew hinted at when he said, safety and security are cultural issues. They're about the culture of how you do science, and they're about the culture in which science is occurring, what's going on around the outside of it. It's about the nature of governance in any given setting, whether it's how a university governs safety on campus or how a nation governs safety within and without its borders. And when we've had various international level meetings looking at GOF, looking at DIRC, and now looking at synthetic biology questions, what you see is that the world cannot even agree on the word security, okay? And it's very serious. I see it now also in trying to improve World Health Organization so that it's capable of responding better than it did to Ebola, to the next great outbreak, which now the next great is already here. It's called Zika. And what you see is that the word security is so charged. It's perceived when Americans say the term as we're about security for us, not you, but we want you to do things so we feel safer. And while we're at it, we define security blended in with terrorism. And if you go to poor countries, particularly in Africa and South Asia, their attitude is, you're just trying to come in here and mobilize us and get us to buy into your tech and your parameters of control, but it's all in your interests, not ours. And one of the biggest complaints, you hear it, a lot of meetings on this topic, is that the more you securitize biology, the harder it is for people from many parts of the world to engage with biological enterprises in Western Europe and North America, because they become security risks. So if you're a really smart 18-year-old in Afghanistan who knows a lot and is super precocious and ready to take on the next great CRISPR revolution, it's a lot harder for you to get clearance to come to Stanford compared to, say, a kid from Shenzhen or a kid from Palo Alto. So I think, when we activate these words and think about the policy implications of them, it's incumbent on Americans to step back and see, how is this being perceived by the non-American? What are we projecting as our notion of security and safety?
Thank you. Another comment?
One thing I would just add to that is I sense that I'm in a room of elites, some really, really, really brilliant people who have a breadth of knowledge and scientific literacy and a lot of capabilities, but, you know, talk about the 0.1%. You know, we live in a world where scientific competency, numeracy, literacy is increasingly a focus of enormous disparity. And so the people at the level who can take in this kind of conversation and participate in it, in the debate or the dialogue, versus the citizenry of the nation, you know, that is becoming increasingly large. Chasm,
gap.
A huge gap, and you know, we can't even count on